As you've been hearing through the course of the week, the Prime Minister and his cabinet were in Hamilton for a retreat where they talked policies. As a matter of fact, they're having another one of those sessions in Ottawa with the whole caucus. All the Liberal MPs are going to be up there. But while he was in Hamilton, he had a meeting with Hamilton Mayor Andrea Horwath, and as usual, talked about a number of things pertinent to Hamilton's situation, including light rail transit. And of course, last year was the big announcement that the federal government was going to match the $1.7 billion investment that the province was going to make in LRT. So that's a whack of cash. And one of the elements of this, and one of the things that a lot of people have talked about to do with LRT, is including an affordable housing component to that. Well, the Prime Minister says that his government agreement to match that $1.7 billion investment made it clear, though, that when he's talking to the mayor, that there had to be a role for affordable housing. Here's what the PM had to say.
Once we receive an actual business plan and project plan from the province on the LRT, we will ensure that there is an appropriate proportion of affordable housing built into those plans.
So, and again, this is still on the planning stage, but we're going to use that story to kick off our weekly session with John Best about politics provincially and federally and locally, of course, because the Prime Minister was here. John, of course, is the publisher of the Bay Observer. John, great to have you back in the program. Thanks for joining us today.
Good to be with you, Bill.
John, I don't know if you heard the conversation. I had Vito Scro on yesterday, former mayoral candidate, of course, here in Hamilton. But Vito spent a lot of time on the other side of that, Infrastructure Ontario, and he was behind the scenes on that board there with a lot of the directions. As I think a phrase I used yesterday is he knows how the sausage is made. Not the photo op announcements that the politicians make, but how they get the money and where it's going to go, et cetera. And he's skeptical about this, too, because everybody says, yeah, there should be affordable housing, but nobody's identified a funding source for that. And that's kind of an important component, isn't it?
It certainly is. And I think the one thing we do know is that not one nickel of the $3.4 billion will be earmarked towards affordable housing. That money will be spent on building the LRT system. And indeed, there's likely to be more money will have to be spent because of what's happened in the construction industry with escalating costs. It's really interesting. I think this whole housing issue is coming to a head a little bit. We saw council earlier this week frustrated because the tiny homes proposal got kicked down the road again. And I think what is missing here, and I don't blame council really, because first of all, we got a lot of new faces, and secondly, when the federal government made the announcement that really made the LRT project a reality, the minister, Catherine McKenna, very clearly stated that affordable housing was going to be a condition. She used the word condition. Well, it turns out there is no mechanism whatsoever to make it a condition. We got a transit project, and we got a housing issue, and there's no place where they meet. So I think there's sort of an impression that somehow affordable housing is going to magically appear either through the efforts of the province or the feds. The reality is that our council is going to have to drive that bus, or it isn't going to happen at all in any meaningful way. And they've still got time, but it's going to have to be a council initiative, because all this stuff about, we're going to make sure the question that I would have liked to have asked the Prime Minister is, who's got the file? Who in Ottawa right now is working on the Hamilton affordable housing along the LRT project? And I think what you'd find is that there's nobody, and there's nobody at Queen's Park working on it. So this is going to have to be a made in Hamilton solution.
Well, exactly. And it kind of reminded me of the early discussion about LRT. And this is going back years, 12, 15 years ago, when they started thinking about doing something like this. And we saw all these artists' drawings, right, of what LRT was going to look like in Hamilton. And it looked kind of nice. Oh, like beautiful, clean track. And here's a little family about to get on the LRT train, etc. The reality is it's there are wires involved. There's digging up the ground involved. There's a lot of infrastructure below. It's a messy proposal to get this thing built, and even while it's operating, and it's of the same ilk. It's just like, yes, affordable housing, because that's the thing. All politicians are in favor of affordable housing these days. Sure they are, but nobody seems to want to pay for it. And that's the stumbling block right now. If I don't see the provincial government kicking money in here, I don't know that the federal government's going to kick money into here. And as to your point, if it falls onto the Hamilton City Council to do this, they have a, shall I say, less than stellar record when it comes to housing, building it, managing it, etc. And they don't have any money. So what's going to happen here?
Well, I think there is money available. The CMHC has certainly is supporting kind of innovative housing projects, which brings me to another point, and that's this tiny housing, tiny shelter situation. I think Brad Clark really hit the nail on the head at council this week. He said what I think a lot of people are thinking. And that is, if you can't get permission from the neighbors to put a tiny housing setup on the middle of Barton Street in Hamilton, you're not going to get it anywhere. And I think really we've got to start looking at a different kind of shelter because I think with these tiny housing, all you're really doing is replacing tents with shacks. And I think what we have to do is start looking at things like modular housing, mobile homes, I don't mean trailers necessarily, but I think that, the prefabricated type of housing. You look at, if you go to the oil sands out west where there's no accommodation for the workers, I mean, they're living in, ATCO trailers that are made up as bunk houses. They can also have separate units with their own door. There's units that are like a wash house where people can clean up. There's washrooms are contained in them. I think we have to start looking at stuff like that. I think there's a better chance of a setup like that if we can find a piece of public property to locate them. I just think we want to feel good about things, but I think we have to be sensible as well. And I'm not sure focusing all of our homeless issue around these tiny shelters is the right answer. I think we need something with a little more substance to it.
John, you've been watching this file, the LRT file, from day one here and doing a great deal of analysis on this. My understanding is, and maybe you can confirm this, is that a number of these blocks that we're talking about here are now owned by the private sector. People have been buying these things up, I guess, in anticipation of this thing ever getting built. How do you get them to partner into this? I mean, if construction company A or whatever investment company A owns this row of houses or this building or whatever, they may have other plans besides affordable housing. So, you got to find a spot for it here, first of all, don't you? And that's going to include a negotiation, and the answer might be no. So where do you go then?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, but I think it begins, before we say that my sense is that obviously any private sector builder that owns a piece of property that where they're planning on putting in a rental or even a condo project, it's not realistic to expect them to reduce how they can maximize the value of that property. So there's no incentive, unless it's a subsidy, for them to rent out apartments at $2,000 a month if they can get $3,000 a month. So but I think that conversation has to take place. And we have a home builders association here in Hamilton. I don't know if anybody on council has talked to them, and at least give them a chance to say if they do have a solution. But let's say there isn't really a solution with the private sector. Then I think the next step is we have to inventory every piece of publicly owned land anywhere near that route, and that may already have been done. But again, Bill, my main point is I think council has to establish this as a priority. There will be money from senior governments. I'm quite convinced that looking at the CMHC website and looking at some of the programs, I think there is money available. What isn't probably available is the initiative to make this happen. This is a Hamilton problem, and council has to take the lead on this. And I think they've been led to believe that somebody else is going to do it for them.
Yeah, well, don't hold your breath waiting for that to happen. John, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for this. Have a great weekend. We'll talk again soon.
You too, Bill. Thanks.
John Best, publisher of the Bay Observer, joining us here on the Bill Kelly Show.